Hi, welcome back to the Sounds Like Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Deborah Henne, and I'm here today with returning guest, Jane Abbate, who understands what it's like to be on the healing journey after trauma. For too many years, she was convinced she would never get over 3 abortions. She believed it was impossible to be understood, forgiven, and loved. But when she connected to the heart of God, she learned she was wrong. She's also known on YouTube as My Mentor Jane, and she helps women and men cope with post abortion guilt and shame, heal heartbreaks, release anger, and learn to forgive. Through her
Mm.
videos and her book, Where Do Broken Hearts Go? Healing and Hope After Abortion, she can help you reclaim a life of purpose, self respect, and joy. She lives in Virginia with her husband and 4 cats. Welcome back, Jane.
It's I'm grateful to be with you. I hope everything's going well.
It is, and I'm so excited to have you back on my show. It's such a fantastic conversation last time. I was like, we need to have you back.
Aw,
So, because abortion is such a huge issue. I mean, the statistics are just mind-numbing to me
they
of
are.
how many lives we've lost through abortion and how many lives are touched through abortion and because of abortion.
Hmm.
Because it really affects, as we talked last time, not just the woman, but it affects her partner,
That's right.
whether it's a boyfriend or a spouse, their parents, both sets of parents,
That's right.
siblings, all these people who will respond in their own way. So can you talk to us and share with us your thoughts on that?
Well, the statistics are 1 in 4 women will have an abortion in their lives, and my understanding now is that with the availability of the abortion pill, which is accounting for over 60% of abortions are now happening in the home with by taking a couple of pills rather than in my day it was going into a clinic. So it makes the abortion even more accessible. Um, so it's just a very wide impacting trauma. And, as you pointed out so well, that it isn't just the woman who's experienced abortion, but it's all the relationships that she has. And it at that time and throughout her life, which was something that it took me a while to understand how something that happened to me, each of my abortions, I kept a secret. I didn't tell anyone. And so I was assuming, well, I mean, it obviously affected my children most of all, the children that died because of abortion. But I thought, well, then it was just me. But how it impacted me ended up impacting every relationship around me, and they didn't know why.
Can you talk about that? Like, how did that wind up manifesting?
Yep.
Because
Yeah.
they didn't know. So it wasn't like a shared grief,
Hmm.
but somehow they were still impacted. Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. So I think a couple of important relationships really suffered. People suffered as a result. One was my relationship with my mom. And my mom and I were never like super close, how some women will say, oh, my mom was my best friend. That wasn't the case with us, my mom and I. Um, it was never easy for me to talk to her about personal things. Nothing physical, I didn't have any education about sex or anything like that. So I had uh, grown up with this idea that I can't really talk to my mom about anything important. We didn't talk about boys. We didn't talk about, really anything. So when I found out I was pregnant at 22 years old for the first time, the last person I thought of going to was my mom. And I was afraid of her anger, of the rejection that I was sure I was going to receive. I don't believe that now. I think she would have been angry, but I don't believe now for a minute she would have rejected me. I think she would have helped. But the point I'm trying to get at is because we didn't have that relationship and I didn't go to her, I harbored this bitterness and resentment in my heart towards her because I believed she didn't make it safe for me to come to her. And what was never a close relationship, what happened as I got older and I'm looking back now, I see how that bitterness and anger and resentment towards her showed up in me not wanting to spend time with her, being very, very short and very close with her. She would ask me about my life. I had a career, even when, planning my wedding. They were real short answers. I made it really clear I didn't want her involved in my life. And I know that was deeply hurtful. And I have some specific memories where I rejected her that I know were painful to her, but I was reacting out of bitterness. And later in my life, I never told her about my abortions. Um, but later in my life, after I had experienced quite a bit of healing and my own experience of forgiveness from God, I was able to open up and be more generous and loving towards her. So there was that whole years and years with my mom where our relationship really suffered, and I had a lot of grief over that because you can't get those years back. The other relationship that had a big impact was the relationship with my first husband. He was not the father of any of my children. I did tell him about the abortions while we were dating, um, but we were never able to talk about it for 15 years. No, it was really more like 12 years of marriage. Um, I never brought it up. He assumed, I'm sure, that it was no problem. But what I think happened is the anger that I felt towards the men who were the fathers of my children ended up coming out towards him. He
Mm,
represented the men who should have stood by me, who should have been, who who should have known, which isn't necessarily fair. So my first husband ended up kind of representing and being the target for a lot of emotions that I hadn't understood and repented of some of my behavior. So I would just break out to him in rage over,
mm.
sometimes really silly things. And our inability to communicate about that and just the anger and anxiety that I brought to that relationship contributed to our eventual divorce. It wasn't the only factor, but it was significant.
Yeah, so there's so much in that that I kind of want to go back and unpack a little bit. So you
Yeah.
talked about your mom, and you talked about how there wasn't a safe place, or you didn't feel safe
Hmm.
talking to her about that because of things leading up to this moment when you were 22 years old. So if
Hmm.
we have somebody who's listening, has teen girls,
Hmm.
preteen girls, um, do you have any suggestions for them of how to create that safe space or clues that maybe they're not creating a safe space? Because sometimes, there's a perspective difference. Like the mom is like, oh, I'm doing the best I can to love my girls, to love my teens, maybe boys too.
Yep.
But yet, maybe there's a clue that a little
Mm.
bit more work or tweaking needs to happen.
That's such a good question, such an insightful one. So, speaking from my experience, I was very shy. And so I wasn't of the personality that was going to bring subjects up. I wasn't going to bring up about, having your period, um, the physical changes that you go through. I was shy about that. I don't know why I was, but I was. And my mom never brought those things up. And I was the youngest of four daughters. I didn't have any brothers. I didn't know how to relate to boys. Again, my personality was shy. And my mom never talked to me about boys and how, what a relationship with a boy should or would be like. And so I think one thing is knowing your child, especially if she's shy or reserved or doesn't seem like she wants to talk about it, don't assume that she doesn't need to talk about it. And so I would say, uh, throwing out kind of like crumbs, like, um, when I had my period, my first period, my mom didn't tell me anything about it, or I was really scared, and I don't want you to be scared. Or, it's really hard when it's really hard to start connecting with boys, and sharing some of her stories, even making some of it up if it wasn't true for her. And the daughter may not respond right away, but at least you've put it out there. It's like the words are in the room. And especially today. But I think the challenge for parents about sex outside of marriage is they want to set a standard that sex is reserved for the sanctity of marriage. um, Being realistic about it, and saying, I feel real. For example, I see, so and so at church, and um, she's had this baby. She's young. There's a lot of consequences to that, but I would always love you if that happened to you, and we could talk about that. I don't want you to be afraid. And so it's I think the responsibility of the mother to overcome her shyness, her insecurity, her, like, I don't know the words. I'm afraid how she'll react. I think it's up to the mother to overcome that and throw out those, I call them those crumbs, um, that would be important. I know from a lot of the women that have been in the abortion healing groups with me, one of the things that's been difficult is they would hear from their parents, if you ever get pregnant, don't come to me looking to be bailed out. Now I get that, and I understand where that can come from, but I have heard so many young girls, or women after having an abortion, said, I couldn't go to my mom. I couldn't go to my dad because they told me if that ever happened, I was on my own. So I'm throwing a lot out. I hope, am I talking too much or?
No, that's so good. I think, just throwing those crumbs, as you call them, leading with your own vulnerability,
Mm,
leading with your own emotions,
yeah.
that can definitely set the stage for the child to be vulnerable in return. Doesn't mean that they will be, but
Right. Right.
maybe, maybe they will be. But I would venture to say that if we choose not to, you probably won't. But if you
Yes.
do, you might.
Yes.
So definitely setting that stage of have opening up those conversations, leading with your own vulnerability. I know, and I like how you talked about unhealthy, setting expectations for unhealthy versus healthy relationships, and that was something I talked about with my oldest daughter as she
Mm,
moved into her teen years. I said, okay, we better have some of these conversations because I had one relationship prior to my husband that I would probably categorize as slightly mildly abusive.
mm,
Not horrible, like calling cops or domestic violence or anything like that, but like just not the best, not the healthiest. And I was young and didn't know and just kind of filed it under, well, this is just a struggle in that person in his life, and
mhm.
I'm going to be strong in this and because I'm going to carry this burden for us. And that was my mentality.
Yeah.
And that's a very wrong mentality. And we wound up breaking up. Um, and after I healed from that, I met my husband,
Mm,
who was so honoring and so kind and so respectful. Sure, he's a person, but he's a human. But I didn't have to carry the whole burden
mhm.
of uh, honor in a certain part in our relationship. And I can use that and be open with my daughter about that. Like, don't be with a guy who's not going to honor you and
Mhm. Mhm.
don't even end it.
Yeah,
And
and here's the consequences of that.
yeah, it was a heartbreak.
Yeah.
Um, some memories that I wish I didn't have.
Yeah.
Um, and the end result was he was not my husband.
Yeah.
And I am married to a great guy now. We have a family, and there's good fruit from that. But if you start your relationship with disrespect and dishonor, don't expect it to get better. Never,
Absolutely.
never
Absolutely.
expect it to get better.
Yeah.
And so that was a point where I had to be vulnerable and hope that that bears fruit in my daughter's life, that
Mhm.
she'll be able to recognize those red flags early on and
Mhm.
be like, hey, this relationship either needs to end permanently or end for
Mhm.
now until it's change, because I can't carry this change for both of us.
And I do think that it's something for mothers and fathers to talk, uh, to be united and talk to themselves about what would we do if our daughter or son came to us and said they were pregnant or they were part of a pregnancy. And this is, assuming that they're not married. Um, what is our position about that? And I have many women in the healing groups whose parents thought they were doing the right thing. Their daughter was too young, or their son was too young to parent a child, and they thought they were doing the right thing by taking them to the clinic or getting them the pills. And so I think that's really important for the parents to talk about, and hopefully they'll agree that they want to choose life,
Hmm.
and then to talk about, so what options would we consider and guide our daughter with. Now, that's something they can have in advance, but even having the conversation with their daughter or with their son, if this ever happens, if you ever find yourself in this situation, come to us and we can talk about it. So bring it up specifically. And then, the daughter or son will probably say, oh, mom, oh, dad, that. Well, we just want you to know that if that happens, we're here. We want to talk through your options with you. Um, because it's such a panic moment that I think a lot of abortions happen because it's in the panic, and the parents being able to say, you can come to us as a safe place, and we can talk through all the options, um, would be valuable.
Do you think it would be valuable? And this is kind of how I've approached it with my daughters, that um, pressing into that positive of saving yourself for your spouse. All of the joy in that, all of, you don't have a head full of bad memories. And
Yes.
when you are intimate with your spouse, it's pure because you don't have anything else pushing in there
Yes.
from somebody else that now you have a lot of heartache
Yes.
about, and broken memories about. And so even just encouraging, and even just the statistics, the secular statistics on long-term relationships,
Hmm.
and that free loving is not free.
No, it is
It's
sure
not
not.
free. It has a long-term relationship or long-term impact on your long-term relationship that you want to have,
Mhm.
plus disease. It goes
Absolutely.
up, way up,
Yeah.
and that affects your marriage, and
Sure.
maybe even your kids, depending on what it is. Um, so, can you talk about that long-term impact on your eventual long-term relationship? I know you kind of touched on it when you talked about your husband and you
Right.
talked about your buried trauma,
Yeah.
um, and how it wound up coming out. But can you talk to us about that piece of it too?
Yeah, so I think what I would add to that is, so there I was in a marriage that I think had a lot of potential. I was bringing all of this baggage, this trauma, this unresolved grief and guilt into a relationship with someone who had no clue what that all involved. She had 3 abortions. She seems like she's functioning, she's got a great job, so on and so forth. He wasn't equipped to deal with it. And even like, you can't assume that the husband will know how to handle you. And
Ah,
and and he didn't. So I was one who threw rage out, but others will keep it inside. And so then there can be that passive aggressive, "Oh, nothing's wrong," It has an impact, which you were alluding to, in the sexual part of the relationship, you know, not feeling safe. I know I withheld the intimacy, the trust in that relationship. Whether part of it was, am I afraid I'm going to be pregnant? Well, I don't want to be pregnant because look what happened. I mean, all that stuff is going on in the background, I believe. And while I initially wanted a family, I said I wanted to have a family. I always wanted to have a family. I believe that I was physically unable to have children. When we were trying, and I was 34 when I got married. So when we like started to try to have kids, I was off birth control. I couldn't get pregnant.
Mm.
And, we tried for 3, 4 years. And, that on top of some of the relational stuff, I never went to see a fertility expert. I never got diagnosed. But after having some later problems where I ended up having hysterectomy, it's my belief that I was unable to get pregnant because of my abortions. And so that uh, wound, that loss between my husband and I, who uh, we wanted to have kids, but we weren't having kids. And so that's another aspect where abortion just keeps on impacting you. Um, and I know it's been a great grief and loss while we were married, but then after the divorce, which was very traumatic for both of us, and for him to, be approaching 40 and having no children. So that physical impact, that emotional impact, but it also showed me that I have had and have great potential to deeply harm other people. My children that died, my mother, and now my ex-husband, who there were other aspects of our divorce, but I feel very badly about how I think that impacted his eventually being childless.
Mm. Now, one other thing I want to kind of highlight is you talk about taking the pill and the abortion pill and how popular that is nowadays.
Mhm,
To me, I think that makes it so easy and almost creates a separation
mhm,
between what you're doing and the long-term impact. Because like
mhm,
I'm just taking the pills.
mhm,
Um, but because, back in the day, like as you said, you had to go to a clinic. Maybe you were at a point where, there was definitely a lot more development in the baby. Maybe there was even movement. And so there was a little bit, I think, more connection and more time for the mother to kind of process what is happening and maybe change her mind versus now just go to the store, buy a pack of pills, and it's done. It's over with. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yes. So I haven't had that experience. My abortions were many years ago. They were two in a clinic and one in a hospital. So I'm not speaking from personal experience about the pills, but here's what I do know from um, supporting girls who have. Um, the moments of panic and fear are the same. She's
Mhm.
traumatized as much as I was by, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Or, I can't have this baby, or the partner's like forcing it, whatever it is. So that those moments of fear and panic are the same, are similar. Um, in some respects, I think the pill is a much greater trauma. I think it might seem like, well, it's simple. I'll take a couple of pills, and perhaps it doesn't seem as complicated as, oh, I've got to show up in a clinic and I've got to be seen and I've got to sit in a waiting room, because some abortions are still happening that way. And so the pills can seem easy, but it's not. I don't think anyone takes it as like, oh, this is simple, and be kind of glib about it. I don't think girls approach it that way, women approach it that way. But what I'm understanding makes the pill so much more. I don't even think I want to compare it, Deborah. So let's just say, to make it so traumatic, is that the abortion is happening at home. It's happening in your bathroom. And when you're in a clinic, you don't see anything really. But when you're having this, you're taking the second pill and the abortion is actually happening now, or the baby is coming out. I hate to say it that way, but you're seeing it, and you're seeing it in your bathroom, and now you have a visual memory that will never leave you. And what is been just just so painful for me to hear is women taking the pills further along in their pregnancy than they realize they are. And now they're not only seeing clots of blood. Can I be graphic here? They're not just seeing clots of blood. They can actually be seeing the baby, the fetus, body parts. And so that I can't imagine the horror of that.
Yeah.
And then now what do you do? Do you flush this down the toilet? Do you put it in the trash? And I say this with all respect for your listeners because I don't want to re-traumatize anyone. Uh, I'm saying this because I know that this happens. It's real. And so for anyone who's listening and who has experienced this or knows someone who's experienced this, know that what you have experienced has been extremely traumatic. And chances are you need help.
Yeah.
And know that even with this trauma, that there's nothing we can do that is outside of God's forgiveness.
Yeah.
And so I talk about this to educate that the abortion pills are not simple. The consequences are equal. A child dies. And in some respects, those pills can be even more traumatic because it's so visual. And now you have the remains that you're responsible for.
And you're
Um,
alone, as you pointed out. Probably
chances
alone.
are you are alone. I know there's from some of the pregnancy centers that I've talked to, there's women who now can't use their bathrooms anymore.
Oh,
So they're in their apartment. Now, what do I do? I can't go into my bathroom because they're re-traumatized every time they go in the bathroom or flush the toilet.
it's a trigger. Right.
It's a trigger, yeah. So what I think where I want to end with that is for all of your listeners, no, it was wrong to do that. And let's try to find the compassion for what that woman has experienced so we can lead her to healing and forgiveness
Yeah.
through Jesus.
Yeah. And as a community around her to lead her to that healing. Because as you mentioned, and I'm going to put your website up here a while,
Thank
mymentorjane.com.
you. Thank you.
As you mentioned, there is nothing that God can't forgive. There
Yeah.
is nothing God can't heal, and there's nothing God can't restore and
Mm,
bring restoration, restorative work to your heart. So I want to end on that note. Can you talk to us about healing and
yeah.
freedom even after trauma, even after experiencing that deep shame?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So um, you have everyone, no matter what, has the potential inside you to access that freedom and that grace. It's taking that next step, which is reaching out, telling someone there's abortion support groups that are available, people who will listen. So if you're holding this inside, reach out, email me, jump on my website, watch one of my videos, and I'll connect you to the help that can take you one step, one tiny step, knowing that that step of reaching out can feel huge. And when you do that, I promise you that that Jesus will meet you at every step and put people in your path. Uh, he'll give you the courage and the ability to take that next step. He will not leave you there to suffer. He's not leaving you there. That's why you're hearing this podcast. That's why he's uh, anointing you, Deborah, to spread the good news. And so when you do that, I promise you, life is so different. And after experiencing 3 abortions and a divorce, my life is so far beyond anything I could have imagined. And it's not because of me. It's because I sought that healing and that freedom from Jesus. And it's if it's there for me, it's there for you and anybody who's listening.
Absolutely. We just sang a worship song yesterday, and some of the lyrics are coming to my head. There's no sin greater than his blood, and there's
Uh,
no shame greater than his love. So
Hallelujah.
thank you so much, Jane, for being a voice of hope
Mm.
and of an example of to inspire us of that freedom and restoration that can happen if you just take those little steps. Don't give up. That's the
Don't
key. Don't give up. God will meet you and he will take you every step of the way because he is so faithful to complete what he has started in you. He is so faithful. So just
Lord.
trust him, take those steps, reach out for help. You can go to her website, mymentorjane.com, if you have experienced abortion yourself directly, or if you know somebody who has experienced abortion, please reach out. Find resources, find those resources to take that one step at a time so one day you can live in healing and freedom and restoration. And don't forget to swipe, tap, or click over to deborahhenne.com. Follow me on social on the X, Instagram, or Facebook at Deborah Henne Author. And let's not forget to tune into our thoughts to make sure they sound like Jesus's, so they sound like freedom.